All right, so welcome to episode number 13, I think, of the first we called it DFCC podcast, then we called it the Lockdown podcast, and I think that's what we're staying with,
Lockdown. I like it.
Do you like it?
Keep it locked.
So the reason why we called it that was because that's literally when the podcast started, was when we were actually in lockdown.
Right.
And so so we talked about it. Francis and I talked about it. We liked the name. We actually received some comments from people just giving us different ideas, and that's kind of the one that we liked the most. And I actually like the way it sounds.
Yeah.
There's something about it.
It's cool. It kind of brings you back to when it all started and the reason why, something like this was able to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's really awesome.
Yeah. Well, and so the goal of this, and I've said this before, is for people to be able to just get an inside look at who we are as individuals, staff or just different people. Because sometimes, we'll see people on stage, and like for Sundays, for example, I'll prepare a message. I'm thinking about it all week. I'll stand on stage, I'll deliver the message, and that's it. For you as a worship leader, also, you're preparing the songs during the week, you're getting ready, you present the songs. And for a lot of people, that's it. That's all they see of us ever,
Right.
And so the goal of this podcast, a little bit, not necessarily the only goal, but one of the goals is for us to just talk,
Yeah.
And there's no agenda. There's no we haven't prepared beforehand.
Nope.
It's just a conversation. So if you guys are listening in for the first time, or you guys don't know who I have in front of me, this is Anthony Barrientos. He's our worship leader at DFCC. And you've been on staff for how long?
Gosh, I think we're getting close to a year that I've been on staff.
You've been on staff for almost a year?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's been great.
I didn't think it was that long.
Yeah, we're I think we're coming on 9 months.
Wow.
So we're getting there slowly but surely. Not quite there yet.
That's crazy. If you would have told me to guess, I would have said probably 4 months.
4 months.
That would have been my guess.
No, man, we're
it's
trudging through.
On staff. So that means you started being part of the worship team how long ago?
When I first got here, there was a lot of changes going on.
Yeah.
But when I first started getting involved was actually because I knew Carlo, the previous worship leader.
Yeah.
So when I recognized him and went and chatted with him after service, we actually had already led together at Warren High School, where he was subbing at the time. So
shout out to Carlo.
Shout out to Carlo. So we actually knew each other. We had even led worship together at Warren High School a couple of times. So he was like, "Hey, man, if you ever want to, come play with us, let me know." And I was
That's cool.
Cool. So actually, the first time I played I was playing bass. Funny enough, the very first time I played at Downey First Christian, I played bass guitar.
Interesting. I feel like you led worship at one of our leadership things too. Did you lead, or were you playing guitar? I feel like that's the first time I ever saw you.
So that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was actually like the next week.
Okay.
After I had played bass.
Okay.
However, that was me and Randy. And
you and
Carlo.
Randy and Carlo. Okay.
Yeah, 3 acoustics. That was the like a service meeting or
I think it was like the
of sorts.
Growth group training.
That's exactly
thing.
what it was.
I think that's what it was.
Growth group.
Man, yeah, it's so crazy. There's so much has happened. I just turned 2 years of being the pastor at this church.
Yeah.
Which is also so crazy to me. Like, it does not feel like it's been that long.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it feels like it's been longer.
Right.
It's like a weird combination of the two, because so much has happened. Yeah, it's crazy. So I was talking to Morgan the other day on our podcast that we did together, and we were just talking about worship, and we're talking about church, and we're talking about what's happening in our church and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that is unique about our church right now is that we carry the momentum of 150 years of history.
Yeah.
And there's good and there's challenging.
Right.
That comes with that, right?
Yes.
So the good thing is we have all this history, and we're part of a church that stood the test of time. Also, the podcast that I did with Mark, Pastor Mark, he gave like a whole background of the church history and how we've stood the test of time and the different stages that we've been in and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
It's very unique. We're actually probably the oldest Christian church in all of Southern California.
Wow.
Downey First. Yeah, it's the
didn't know
oldest
that.
one.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
which
awesome.
is interesting because we have, in Downey, we also have the oldest McDonald's in all the United States. So
I think there's a correlation there. There's a
gotta
reason
be.
why this church has been able to sustain that long. We have McDonald's in our corner.
I think that's what it is. Should have made our lives shorter though. But so I guess one of the things that I would love to hear you talk on is in regards to your experience at our church when it comes to worship. Because here's the thing: we have all this tradition, and we have all this sort of again tradition of the way things have been done in the past, which is a beautiful thing, by the way. The liturgies and all the hymns and all that kind of stuff. We come in, like, we're both new right here, and we get a lot of stage time.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of stage time. So I preach every Sunday, you lead worship every Sunday, but we're the new guys. Like,
Right.
we literally just showed up. So we're hired, and we're coming in with something that's different. And there's a lot of positive that comes from that, but there's also a lot of questions.
Yes. Definitely.
And so I don't necessarily want us to get into the thick of it, but what are some of the things that you've seen that have been beautiful as a result of the new that we're bringing? Because we just come in, like I'll say again, we're the new guys.
Yeah.
And so what has been your experience as far as that?
Yeah. I guess I'll just start by saying that I love the amount of tradition that is here at this church. And you can see in the people how much they love this place.
Yeah.
And I think that ties into just how long they've been here, which is something that you and I can't quite understand yet. So we don't pretend to understand that. We don't pretend to just get it and just say, hey, we're here now. We're going to flip this on its head, and this is the end all be all.
Right.
But we do really appreciate that level of tradition and that level of just love for this building and for this place that God's been working in for so many years before we even knew this place existed.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. For me personally, to see what God is doing in this place has been phenomenal. At first, it was really, really hard, as you and I know. I mean, we started and got greeted by COVID hitting, and that was not easy. Just even from a technical side of just being outside and how like physically draining that was for you and I, and the amount of setup that took, and no one would ever know or realize the amount of work that went into that. But so stuff like that. So that was a rough go of it. And then that was kind of our, at least for sure, my introduction to being anybody here at this church. Who is this guy? Was in the thick of the peak of COVID even. So everyone's scared, everyone's frantic, and then suddenly more change is happening. So that's kind of crazy. But I've noticed specifically in the past few months so much growth in the church culture. And what I mean by growth in the church culture is that I just see more and more people willing to actively seek after Jesus. And like openly, like, I don't know that wasn't there before, but I'm seeing that it's becoming more of a, like, this is who we are.
Yeah.
Which is so beautiful. So I'm not implying that it wasn't there before, but more so that it's becoming the, like, poster board for who we are as a church, which I think is so appropriate. It just says, hey, we are going to be a church of prayer. We're going to pray for one another, period.
Yeah.
That's who we are. We want to seek out Jesus first before anything. In our worship culture has been changing, where I'm seeing people more and more finding that freedom in the presence of the Lord that we find in Scripture.
Yeah.
Like, so it's beautiful to see it come to fruition. And we've talked before about this, and at least in terms of like expressive worship with people, you know, raising their hands, jumping and dancing. That's not necessarily what we seek. We seek people engaging with the Lord during a time of worship. So that can look many different ways. So we're not seeking for that to look one specific way. But just seeing that more and more people are becoming engaged, wanting to sing along, wanting to be a part of the service. People are not so much late for like worship, which I think is really indicative, something that other people might not really notice. But I know you and I notice when we get here on a Sunday morning and we realize that it's not till 2 or 3 songs in that people start showing up.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe this isn't on on high on their agenda of things. Maybe they just view it as, hey, we're going to miss a couple songs. No big deal. We'll be there in time for the sermon. But I think it's really beautiful to see, like, no, people are on the dot here, and they've been coming, and it's like, hey, no, we want to be a part of this. We want to be here. So from everything from the hymnal service to our 10 a.m. English to our Spanish service, it's just been drastic changes. And it's been, I think, for the better. Yeah, it's been cool. One of the things that I love that we did, it was happening before we got here, but we continued doing it, was our hymn sing service. So we have a hymn sing service at 9:00. Yep. 9:15? Yeah, 9:15. Hymn sing service in our cafe, and then our contemporary English service starts at 10, and then we have a Spanish service at 11:30. And one of the things that was interesting to me about the hymn sing is that my assumption was a hymn sing service is going to be low energy. Like it's just going to be low energy and kind of like boring. That was my preconceived notion, because I grew up in a Presbyterian church, and it was all hymns, and hymns was like the most boring part of the service, like by far was so boring. That's because I was a child and I didn't understand the theology and all the beautiful, the beauty of the songs themselves. My assumption was it was going to be boring, but I walk in there, and as there's a lot of energy in there. Yeah. Like they're singing loud, and they're not clapping during the song, but a song will end and they'll clap. It's just like it's a beautiful thing in the sense that we've respected the tradition and uplifted it, upheld it. But at the same time, we see all those people, they're going into the contemporary service, which is kind of a weird way of saying it. Contemporary seems like we're in the 90s, but I'm saying like the service that we do. And I love seeing that. I love seeing how people are flexible. I love seeing how people's hearts are open. Yeah. I love seeing how our church, even though it's an old church and people have been here for a long time, they're understanding what we're doing, right? And they're understanding why we're doing it, which is really cool, because what I see in almost everybody that have been here for a while is that they understand that different doesn't necessarily mean wrong. There's not right and wrong. It's just different. Yeah. I always use the example of Francis. I don't understand how he dresses. And I've given up on trying to understand how he dresses, because to me, he looks like a homeless guy. And I've told him that before. I'm not telling you anything that I want to say to him in person. But like, I think about myself the way I used to dress before, long hair, earrings, just a style that older people just didn't understand. But I was in style. So I knew what I was doing, and the others didn't understand. So anyway, what I see in our people that have been in our church for a while is that even though they don't necessarily understand the style of music that we're doing, that for us is just like we listen to it all the time, or the lighting, the screen, all that kind of stuff. But they have the maturity to know that we're there because we're in part, not in everything that we do, but in part to reach a generation that is unreached. And so they get that. And I see that, and I love that that's what's happening in our church. Yeah, I agree. I think one of the most important things is just kind of like you said, it's just not that one is right or wrong. And I think that same level of respect goes both ways. Yeah. We approach this historic, this beautiful, like, let's take hymn service, for example. Yeah. We don't disrespect this service. We uphold this. Yeah. We approve of this. Yeah. And then the same thing should follow on both sides. So long as what you're doing is something that's biblical, something that is worshiping Jesus. These are just different ways of worshiping Jesus. Correct. So I think just identifying that, being able to say, hey, I recognize this as an appropriate way of worshiping the Lord. Yeah. And like, truly, that's all that really matters at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Or besides, other than that, it's like, what are we talking about? Right. Like, are we just talking about preferences? Because we can talk about preferences all day long and disagree all day long. Yeah. Or we can come back to the root of it and say, are we worshiping Jesus? Yes or no? Yeah. And if the answer is yes, then we should endorse this. Yeah. This should be okay. So long as, nothing sinful is going on. Right. Right. So exactly. Well, and I think that the reason why this church has stood the test of time is because they have historically been open to changes. This church wouldn't have survived any other way. This is the reason why we've been here for 150 years. Yeah. So there's something in our DNA that allows for us to accept these changes. And I want to do the same thing. Like,
I see myself, this is kind of a weird thing that I've said to you guys as a staff, is I don't see myself as Jesus. I see myself more as John the Baptist. Like, again, I'm not comparing myself to them. Like, but what I'm trying to say is that John the Baptist, was about preparing the way. So this is what I try to do with you guys as well. Yeah. A large percentage of our staff now is much younger than I am, like 20 years younger than me. And we're reaching this new generation. And so my goal is not to necessarily understand everything that they're doing, but to be able to pave the way to facilitate for you guys to be able to do what God's put in your heart.
Right.
And so that's part of what I think my role is here. But I have to navigate both sides of it, which is the tradition, which is good because there's a lot of wisdom in the tradition. Mm-hmm. And then the new, which is also good, but sometimes there can be a little bit of chaos in the new. So it's trying to navigate those two things, which makes my job really interesting.
Yeah.
So we've got, so did you want to say anything else about that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So something else that I was thinking about was just all the things that we have now that we didn't have before, like sound system. We have a big screen. We have lights that we're probably going to hopefully get a new lighting. But we've got all this technology that we have right now. And so we've got, it's a blessing. It's a huge blessing. Talk to me a little bit about when that blessing can become a hindrance, because our goal, we've talked about this, is that everything that we do, that we use, the goal is for it to be a tool for those things to help make the message as clear as possible and not interfere.
Yes.
This Sunday was a train wreck. As far as technology, it was just one of those Sundays where everything that went bad. Yeah. Just like the video was wrong. The video played at the middle of my prayer. Yeah. And then when they played the video, it was like fast forwarding. Like, it was just weird. The lyrics were off. It was just everything that could go wrong went wrong this Sunday. Yeah. I love the things that we have, but at what point does that make sense? It's kind of a weird question, but when is it helpful? When is it not helpful? How is, let's speak to that a little bit.
Right. This is like such an expansive topic. Yeah. This is something that I take really, really seriously. So for those people who don't know me and what I'm about, I do filter things like this in my everyday, in my week to week. This is part of the itinerary to ensure that things like this are not leaking in where they ought not to be. So if we're talking about something like technology or something like, so this I think personally this is like a case-to-case basis. So I don't think there's an end-all be-all statement that we simple people want to just put a yes or no knob on it and say, is this good or is this bad? It should be that simple. It's not that simple, right? Unfortunately. So when it comes to something like technology, personally, the way I view it's case to case, but more importantly, I ask myself the question, is this working towards our mission? Is this helping our mission here at this church? If it is, cool, let's do it. If it's not, shut it down. Yeah. Like cold turkey, this is not happening here. Yeah. So with that being said, when it comes to something like technology, this stuff, when it's performing right, and like you said, this week was, from what I've heard, granted, people might not realize when you're on stage, I don't get to see all of these, mishaps. Like, this is straight behind me.
No, and again, for us, because we have a weekly production meeting.
Yes.
So we go through everything.
Yes.
And so for us, a train wreck is probably, for most people, is going to be an exaggeration. Like I say, it wasn't that bad. There's just like an issue with the video, that was it.
Right.
For us, it was a train wreck because we worked so hard on this.
Yes. And I think there's some beauty in that too. To be honest with you, I think it shows perseverance of our congregation. I think it shows the ability to work through distractions. I think as a staff, it shows that our ability to focus on Jesus even when these waves are crashing around us and things aren't so easy to just keep that attention focused. Yeah. So from my perspective, I try to limit something that might hinder, if it's going to hinder our mission. Yeah. And our mission is just to create disciples, create worshipers. Yeah. That's what we want to do. And if there's something that helps that, like, hey, what if What if the words are really easy for them to read? What if they're beautifully on the screen in a non-distracting way? That would definitely help them sing along with us, which is super important. There's power in their voice. So things like that, like to that extent, yes, this does help a lot. To the point where it starts crashing and burning, then it's like, okay, well, let's reconsider things like this. So I guess what I'm getting at is that we're going to have bad weeks. We had a bad week, at least technologically speaking. We will have more to come. Look out for them. They're going to be great. And we're going to have weeks where, where everything goes really, really smoothly. And we've had those where we're like, man, did anything go wrong? That was awesome. There was like nothing distracting going on. But I think most importantly, it's our ability to see through those, like I said, we're going to talk later. We're going to talk about ensuring that those don't happen again. But at the same time, there are many things more important to us in our day-to-day. Like I said, ensuring that the mission is getting done is more important to us as a staff than it would be to just make sure that something doesn't go wrong again. We'll still talk about it. We'll still try to fix those things, as we should. I believe that's part of our responsibility as staff members, is to make sure that we're not going to, lead someone into a spot where they can just be like, man, that was a disaster. Because if they're focused on us messing up, then they're not focused on Jesus, which is not something we're operating. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if they're focused on how great we're doing, wow, look at this. This is so stunning. This is so beautiful. On the opposite end, it's the same thing. It's the same thing that we're trying to avoid, which is your attention is not on Jesus. So we operate in that tension.
I love that. In the middle. That's such an interesting topic to me. I was talking a little bit to Morgan about it in our podcast, and we were talking about this whole idea because I love Morgan. I love the way she sings. She has an amazing voice. For one thing, she's an amazing voice. But another thing that's so special about her, and I'll speak about her, but this is the same thing for you, and I've seen it in our worship team as a whole, is that there's such a big difference. It's a big difference, but it's subtle at the same time between performing and worshiping.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Before I say anything more, can you speak on that? Because that to me is always a fascinating topic. That difference between performing and worshiping. It's so interesting to me.
Yeah, this is so fun for me because like I literally listen to like podcasts about this kind of stuff like all the time. So it's funny to be on this end of it. However, so we're talking about performing versus actually worshiping. So I was actually listening to a podcast today. So
the Jeremy Riddle one?
Yes. Jeremy Riddle.
What's it called?
It's called Riddle and I'm all over the place. It's called Redman and Riddle.
Redman and Riddle.
Yeah. Okay. So that's Matt Redman. He wrote 10,000 Reasons, a bunch of other amazing songs like that. Jeremy Riddle he was a worship leader with Bethel for a really long time. He's actually working now in Anaheim, so not too far from here. But he's one of my favorite worship leaders, if not my favorite worship leader. Mostly not because he's so talented, which he is, but that's not why I call him my favorite worship leader.
And he wrote the book, The Reset.
Yes.
He wrote that book. Okay, perfect.
Yes. So The Reset is awesome. And he touches on a lot of topics like this. The reason why I like him so much is because he doesn't steer me towards him. He steers me towards Jesus. He doesn't try to figure out a way for me to say, hey, this is the Jeremy Riddle way of doing things. You should do it that way.
Interesting.
It's like, I don't know where you're at. Why don't you seek Jesus and see what Jesus has to say about the matter, and making sure you're being obedient to what he's saying and preparing yourself for those moments, preparing yourself to be able to listen in on the Spirit and be attentive to those things. So that's why I like Jeremy Riddle so much. But all that to say, coming from performing to worshiping, this is a very, very fine line that is to be walked, so to say. So for those of you that don't know, on our worship team, we actively seek to get away from performance. We actively seek weekly to not draw attention to ourselves in a way of like prideful intent. So we actively seek against these things so that we can just worship the Lord Jesus. An important thing to note is that we aren't it's not my job to be a mediator between someone and Christ. That's not my position. I was not called to be a mediator to Christ. That's a weight that I can pretend to bear and never truly bear.
There's only one mediator, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
So that's not my position to just say, hey, come with me. I'm gonna put you in touch with the big guy. Like, that's not how that works. So we've actually all been called a royal priesthood. We all have this priestly duty. And so that's something that I was listening to today that I thought was so beautiful, is like, it's not that, hey, I'm the priest up here, get in touch with me and I'll get you in touch with God. It's, I'm a priest, I want to worship Jesus, you guys are all a royal priesthood. Let's come together, let's sing together as a unit, as a congregation, and let's find Christ. Let's give him the worship that he deserves, that he alone deserves. And that's what we're actively seeking. So when it comes to performing, the reason why it gets so confusing is because when you look at the model, it looks a lot like a secular model. It would look a lot like a concert setting. This is why these things get tricky. And that's why I think from the outside perspective, when you look in, you say, hey, this looks a little fishy. This looks like a bit much. However, I think one of the key ways to get rid of that, at least as a church body, and this is practically speaking, just practically speaking, is things like this, getting in touch with one another, knowing one another, and knowing people's intentions behind things. I won't go into detail, but I had this whole quarrel with this company that I had an issue with. And I was like, this company is so slimy. This company doesn't know, doesn't want me to truly worship Jesus. They just want my money. This is like a church service. And then I was like, this is so slimy. I want nothing to do with this company anymore. And then I find out, like, from, let's just say, another source, that this person knows the people at the top of this company, and this person is so humble, so holy, just wants to serve the church. And he says, I have this service because I want to provide this service to the churches that don't have the ability to have these things. And I was like, oh man, dang, don't do that to me. You know what I mean?
You want to hate him.
I want to hate him. Like, I want to be mad at him still, so things like that. So I share that silly example to say, when you truly get to, like, potentially know somebody, when you get to know somebody's intentions, these things start to become more clear. Like, for example, you might see someone like Morgan on stage, phenomenal voice, go up there and be like, oh, she sings so well. She must be so full of herself, so much pride. She's just up there to sing. And then you meet Morgan and you're like,
no.
Whoa, that's so opposite of the case, right? And you're like, that's so not what she is. And I think that you'll find similar answers to everyone on that stage. And that's something, like I said, that's something that we work towards.
That's awesome.
All the time.
Yeah, and it's never perfect, but there's something that happens when because two things can happen when you're in the audience, for lack of a better term. You're sitting in the audience and you're worshiping. Two things can happen to the person that's sitting in the audience, or standing in this case, is that you're like, man, she can listen to her voice, dude. That is such an amazing voice. She's killing it up there, or on the guitar. That's one thing. The other thing is, like, you're just lost. Like, everyone on stage disappears. Nothing matters. It's just you and God.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't really put words on it, but what you guys do is it's almost like an impossible job. Like, there's no way to get it right. You can't ever get it right.
I agree.
Right? And defining what success is. In other words, how do you define a successful worship set? Right? How do you define that? Like, hey, this went well. What does that mean? Right? It's hard. But, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I love this topic because it's such a subtle difference. Like, if you just look at it at face value, it has nothing to do with the person raising their hand or putting their hand down, or he has two hands up, or both hands down, or has his eyes closed. There's something that I can't put words into, that I'll see someone singing and, like, that person's doing it for themselves. Maybe I'm just judging, but I've been in the church world for such a long time that I say, like, that person's performing. Like, they have their eyes closed, but it's really about them. They want to show off, right? And there's another person that can sing 1,000 times better or 1,000 times worse, and they just bring you into worship. Yeah. There's just this thing that it's not that they're being the mediator, but it becomes contagious. Like, I want to be where she's at. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And so you seek that because you see it. I had lunch with a few of our leaders it's a couple of Sundays ago, and we had a conversation about worship, and I'm like, oh gosh, because just so you guys know, as a pastor, as a worship leader, we're constantly getting criticized, constantly getting criticized. Every day. It's just part of the thing. And we talk about it all the time. It's not something that we expect to ever end, because as our church grows, there's just going to be more of it, right? And so you just deal with it. You just deal with the criticism. So anyway, my presupposition was, okay, here it comes, right? But it was so beautiful to hear it. What they were saying was, and these are people that have been in church for a long time, by the way. They've been in our church at least 15 years, part of our church, way before we ever got here. And it was a group. There was several of them. There was like three or four couples, and everyone was agreeing. They were saying, when we worship at church now with the worship team that's there now, there's something, and this is not even the guy was saying, he's not a guy that lifts his hands up. He's not expressive in his worship. But what he was saying was, when I see them on stage and they're worshiping God, like what I felt like I wanted to do, I wanted to run up on stage and be with them in that moment. Because it was, and he said that, and he also said it was like getting a glimpse of heaven. Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. That was crazy to me. It was so beautiful because my thought was, you don't have to go up on that stage. Right. This is for everybody. Right. So that was interesting. Yeah. I loved hearing that. Yeah. I think that glimpse of heaven is exactly that, right? It's the Spirit that lives in us. It's the Spirit that was there with us, that is here with us. And I think when people feel that way, and that's like, and how good the affirmation can feel. But it's even better when the affirmation is presented in such a way, because it's not affirmation of me. It's affirmation that we are seeking Christ appropriately. So as you know, like I don't seek affirmation. No. I don't want affirmation. And I think we're kind of similar in that sense. But it is beautiful to see that Christ is going to work through us, and Christ has worked through us, and even in spite of us sometimes, or even often, and those moments are beautiful. So I think when people are more vocal about that, it's really beautiful, because Christ is just moving, man. He's just moving in this church, and it's been heavy on our hearts to just want to be attentive and be obedient to what Christ is doing here at our church. Like, not like, hey, at the church at large, because that's so broad that we can hide behind that. Not that that's wrong. Like, not that the big church at large, and we talk about that often too. It's like, not that that's an issue. It's that, no, what is Christ doing right here, right at our church? What is Christ doing in you, not somebody else? And I think that's been a barrier that we're navigating through, and we've been seeing people just be liberated by what Christ is doing, not by what we're doing. Christ is so faithful that we are seeing him work. And when we are being obedient to him, I just have this, or I should say, I'm just noticing that he's being even moreover faithful, moreover graceful. And maybe that's not biblically true. I don't know. But from what I'm seeing, like, I can just tell you what I'm seeing here at this church. And that's what I'm seeing. As we be more obedient, I'm seeing Christ just be displayed. And I think maybe that just has to do with us being more attentive to what he's doing. And that likely is it. But it's just beautiful to see Christ working here, and just, miracles happening, and people's lives being changed. So often those are stories that we just hear about. Like, oh yeah, he said that he got healed, or he said that his marriage was just turned around for the better. This person's life was just going into the gutter, and now this is one of my best friends, one of someone I look to as a brother in Christ for help. And it's like, all three of those we've personally seen, like, recently, very recently, like even 2 years ago, like, if that's as far away as it gets, like, that's very recent. Like, we've seen these things happen, and it's like, Christ is just moving, man. Christ, it's crazy. I love that. I'm gonna close with this here real quick. So I just want to say, I love you, man. I really do. And there's so many reasons, so many things that I could say about you that I love and like about you. But I'll highlight something, and I want to kind of piggyback on something that you said that has to do with our church. And it's that one of the things I love about you is I feel like you lead like Jesus leads. And the reason why I say that is because Jesus is a servant. You know, he didn't come to be served. He came to serve. When he was the most powerful person in the room, he decided to wash people's feet. And so one of the things I love about you and that you've brought to our church and to the DNA of our church is the fact that your biggest goal, like your payday, your reward, is when you see other people shine. That's very unique and is very uncommon, especially for someone that has the option to be on stage all the time and to be constantly in the middle. You've assembled this team of people that I've noticed you're growing more and more in this, but that it's all about giving away glory, giving away credit. We did a worship night. I think this was like a few months ago. And one of the things that I loved about that worship night is that, I gave kudos to Francis. Then Francis stands up and he gives kudos to you. And you're like, it's all about you guys. And it's just this beautiful dance of giving away credit.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I love, because I think that's what God is doing in our church as well. If you notice in none of the miracles that we've seen or in any of the breakthroughs that we've seen, any single person can take the credit. Perfect example was last Sunday. So last Sunday, I think it was like 25 people gathered after Sunday service, after our English service, around this couple that were praying for very specific breakthrough.
Yes.
And we all just started praying over them. And we just started praying and believing and almost like declaring by faith that this is what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Guess what? 10 to 15 minutes later, boom, breakthrough that they'd been waiting for weeks happened in that moment.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I love that is because not only is God present and in real time moving, but it's not about any particular person. No one can take the credit for the miracles that have been taking place in our church. So I love that. And I feel like that's part of what you've brought into this, that's part of who you are. And so I love that. I love that about you.
Thank you.
All right. Any closing thoughts?
No, let's just keep at it, man.
Let's keep going, man. Keep going. All right, you guys. See you next time.
Thank you.